Hello friends, you are watching 3 Years Vision, an innovative distance learning channel. It is most important and desired that if you are interested in improving your learnings in financial management, subscribe to our channel, and click on bell icon to get our future updates.
International investment and financing decisions. In this model, we look at the international dimension of projects appraisal. Companies that undertake overseas projects are exposed to exchange rate risks, as well as other risks. First of all, we discuss the overview of the risks involved in international investment. Many of the projects that companies are appraising may have an international dimension. For example, the assumption can be made that part of the production from a project may be exported. In appraising a tourist development, a company may be making assumptions that the number of tourists from abroad who may be visiting imported goods and materials could be a factor in the determination of cash flows. All these examples shows that exchange rate will have an influence on the cash flows of the company. After its overview, now we discuss the main 6 key factors of risks to be undertaken while international investment and financing decisions. Number 1. Effects of exchange rate assumptions on project value. Number 2. Forecasting cash flows from overseas projects. Number 3. The impact of exchange controls. Number 4. Transaction, translation, and economic risks. Number 5. Issue in choosing finance for overseas investment. And finally, number 6. Cost and benefits of alternative sources of finance for multinational companies, MNCs. Effects of exchange rate assumptions on project value. Changes in exchange rates are as important as the underlying profitability in selecting an overseas project. There are main 6 elements. Number 1. Purchasing power parity. Purchasing power parity theory states that the exchange rate between two companies is the same in equilibrium when the purchasing power of currency is the same in each country. Number 2. Interest rate parity. Under interest rate parity, the difference between spot and forward rates reflects differences in interest rates. Number 3. International Fisher effect. The international Fisher effect states that currencies with high interest rates are expected to depreciate relative to currencies with low interest rates. Number 4. Expectation theory. Expectation theory looks at the relationship between differences in forward and spot rates, and the expected changes in spot rates. Number 5. Calculating NPV for international projects. The NPV of an international project is normally calculated by converting the overseas cash flows into the domestic currency, using a forecast exchange rate. And number 6. The effect of exchange rates on NPV. Where there is a devaluation of the domestic currency relative to a foreign currency, then the domestic currency value of the net cash flows increases and thus the NPV increase. Forecasting cash flows from overseas projects. There are 7 main factors to be taken into account while forecasting cash flow. Number 1. Forecasting project cash flows and average present value. Number 2. Effect on exports. Number 3. Taxes. Number 4. Subsidies. Number 5. Exchange restrictions. Number 6. Impact of transaction cost on NPV. And number 7. A recap of the APV approach. The impact of exchange controls. Here there are three main factors of exchange control affecting the international investment and financing decisions. Number 1. The nature of exchange control. Number 2. Impact of exchange controls on investment decisions. And number 3. Strategies for dealing with exchange controls. Transaction, translation, and economic risks. The main risks faced by companies dealing with foreign currencies are transaction, translation, and economic risks. So the main exposures are: Number 1. Transaction exposure. Transaction risk is the risk of adverse exchange rate movements, occurring in the course of normal international trading transaction. Number 2. Translation exposure. Translation risk is the risk that the organization will make exchange losses when the accounting results of its foreign branches or subsidiaries are translated into the home currency. Number 3. Economic exposure. The economic exposure is the risk that exchange rate movements might reduce the international competitiveness of a company. It is the risk that the present value of a company's future cash flows might be reduced by adverse exchange rate movement. Issue in choosing finance for overseas investment. A part of fulfillment of the performance objective: evaluate potential business and investment opportunities, and the required finance options. You are expected to be able to identify and apply different finance options to single and combined activities in domestic and multinational business markets. There are two main elements as: Number 1. Financing and overseas subsidiaries. And number 2. Choice of finance for an overseas investment. At the end, cost and benefits of alternative sources of finance for multinational companies. Multinational companies will have access to international debt facilities, such as Eurobonds and syndicated loans. So there are main options and factors of source of financing. Number 1. International borrowing. Number 2. Euro currency markets. Number 3. Syndicate loans. Number 4. The advantages of borrowing internationally. And number 5. The risks of borrowing internationally. At the end, we warm welcome your valuable comments to improve our learning levels. Thanks and goodbye.